Over Every Extinguished Past by Tucuxi. Summary. It's been a little more than a month since everything almost went to shit. Since the armed detective agency and the port mafia faced off against Dostoevsky. Since Yokohama lost its fragile, balanced peace. And it's also been just a month since Rampo emerged from Poe's book, all pride and glowing accomplishment for solving 500 murders in a week, and just a passing comment about the other guy losing patience and starting punching people. Or, Chuuya emerges from Poe's book, exhausted, to discover that Dazai had been severely injured. Standing guard in the agency's infirmary, Yosano, Kunikida, and Chuuya find unexpected common cause in their desire to keep Dazai in one piece despite his best efforts to hide his vulnerabilities from everyone around him. Part 1. It's been a little more than a month since everything almost went to shit. Since the armed detective agency and the port mafia faced off against Dostoevsky. Since Yokohama lost its fragile, balanced peace. It's been a little more than a month since Atsushi and Aktagawa's team up against Goncharov allowed the other allied agency and mafia members to capture Pushkin and deactivate his cannibalism virus, saving Fukuzawa and Mori, saving the pair of them infected during the chase as well. It's been a little more than a month since Rampo trapped himself in a mystery novel as a sacrifice play to take the port mafia's heaviest hitter off the board. And more than a month since Dazai used the eyes of God to locate Fyodor Dostoevsky in a cafe, rather than at the mining site. Dostoevsky is in prison, locked in an ability-proof cell with mechanisms even Sakaguchi Ongo doesn't know. The cell won't stop Dostoevsky forever, but it's slowing him down, and that's what they need for now. And it's also been just a month since Rampo emerged from Poe's book, all pride and glowing accomplishment for solving 500 murders in a week, and just a passing comment about the other guy losing patience and starting punching people. Dazai isn't worried. The balance of power in the city isn't so reliant on Chuuya that the port mafia will collapse without him. He was in Europe for longer than this. So what if Koyo and her golden demon have been seen in the field more often in the last month than in the 18 previous months combined? So what if the Black Lizard are racking up more shootouts than statistically indicated for this time of the year, this level of crime in the city? So what if Aktagawa and Rashomon have been engaging in more large-scale displays and fewer covert assassinations? Atsushi told Dazai about their agreement, after all, and about the 6-month no-kill trial. Everything that's happening falls within acceptable perimeters. It would be foolish for Dazai to be worried about events he predicted, even if they are stretching into a lower percentages of projected probability. Dazai doesn't regret having given Rampo the information he needed to trap Chuuya. That would never have gotten Fukuzawa into Anne's room safely if For the Tainted Sorrow had been on board, if Chuuya had been able to confront them, to track them down. They couldn't have done it even with light snow, with all of Dazai's and Rampo's combined ingenuity and the agency's abilities combined. So Dazai doesn't regret it. It was necessary. It led to the best possible outcome, and it saved lives. He is on the side that saves lives. That's what he does. He can't regret it. There are a lot of things he can't regret. What's one more? But when his phone makes a peculiar buzzing sound and then barks once, the short yap of a terrier, Dazai pulls it out of his pocket without a moment of thought. He automatically shunts Kunikida's voice to the back burner of his brain, to process on its own while he focuses his attention on the phone, on something more urgent. He's good at multitasking. He's always been good at multitasking, at letting his brain run a few tracks on autopilot while he does something else with his focus. maybe Dazai should be paying more attention to Kunikida, to the neighborhood around the two of them. They're currently working on tracking down the last of a gang of toughs who have a grudge against Francis, and by extension, a grudge against Dazai. But that yap, that's an alert Dazai set for Eyes of God, and only fed the virgin he's told 2 faces. Or 1 face in 2 states. Chuuya and corruption. The alert noise wasn't a wolf howling. That much is good. Chuuya's mind is intact, and he's in control of his ability, of Arahabaki. But that the alert pinged at all means he came out of the book somewhere other than the Mafia territory. Mori has encrypted all of the CCTV cameras in Mafia areas beyond Dazai's ability to easily circumvent. If he hacks in any more aggressively than he has already, Mori will know for a certainty that Dazai, and by extension the ADA, has a reason to need his cameras, and determine that they have access to the program. That's not an acceptable risk, not when the alliance is still so tentative. Operating under the assumption that Chuuya would be safe if he reappeared on Mafia territory, Dazai decided not to hack in, not to risk tipping his hand to Mori. As he thumbs his phone open, Dazai takes the opportunity to check in on his short-term memory, to unroll his diverted focus at double speed so he can catch up. Kunikida has been running through a list of the potential nobodies who might be involved in the latest upset in this neighborhood. Dazai recognizes 1 or 2 of the names as old suspected members of the Sheep who didn't join GSS, and makes a note to add them to the ADA's paperwork later. He makes an intentionally exasperating, complaining kind of noise, so Kunikida won't think anything is wrong, and scrolls through the footage of Chuuya that's been collected by the Eyes of God. Chuuya is clear across town, nearly as far from his apartment as he could be while still being in city limits, well out of Mafia territory. It looks like he hasn't slept for the entire time he's been gone. His coat is a mess, and his shoes look like they're in a terrible shape, but his hat is fine. Good, Dazai thinks, flipping to another app. A single ping confirms that the microscopic tracker ship he embedded in the felt just over 4 years ago is still working. It's been a month, 34 and a quarter days, Dazai's mind says, impatient with inaccuracies even in his own thoughts, since Chuuya went into the book. The flow of time in Poe's book doesn't seem to be entirely consistent from book to book, and they have only 2 examples from which to extrapolate. Still, Dazai forcibly redirects the part of his mind trying to calculate how long Chuuya had to spend punching people before he comes up with a solid range of numbers. He doesn't want to know. Once he knows, he can't stop knowing. Dazai shrinks the tracker program, makes an affirmative noise at Kunikida without paying much attention to him. Because his partner isn't yelling, and he's not silent, that means there's no danger and no real need for Dazai's full attention right now. Instead, Dazai flips back to the Eyes of God images, scanning the grainy security footage greedily, checking Chuuya over for visible injuries, for the limp that means a pulled muscle or strained ligament, a hidden source of pain. Chuuya seems to be moving fine, or at least well within mission acceptable parameters. Dazai doesn't feel a weight rise from his chest. He doesn't feel relief or a rising bubble of hope, or optimism, or a lightening of his spirit. He didn't expect to feel those things. He never has before, and there was no reason to expect this series of events, a fairly predictable set of stimuli, to produce new emotional reactions in him. He hovers his fingers over Chuuya's face, just for a moment, tempted to pinch, to zoom in, to be sure. Kunikida shouts, alarmed. Dazai snaps to attention. That's important. Then tires are squealing, a transmission whirring, a woman is screaming. Dazai has a moment to think. Shit, the van thefts were related after all. Rampo will be... before a lean body slams into him, rolling him across the pavement towards a recessed doorway. The transport van, it's the one reported stolen 2 weeks ago, Dazai thinks, memorizing the license plate as they roll and skid, unable to stop processing information even as he bites back a scream from the scraping pain of concrete against his exposed cheekbone. The van barrels into Kunikida's body, braced over his own. Dazai just has time to think. This will be such a mess. This isn't how I want it to go. The world goes bright, then black. The less said about Chuuya's time in the book, the better. Well, that's probably not entirely true. Chuuya will have plenty to say to that asshole Dazai the next time their paths cross. And isn't it strange that he's planning for that kind of thing now? That he can think of Dazai in the present tense again? That he can tentatively think of him in future tense these days? As for the next time he sees Edagawa Rampo, well, that brat had better hope someone else from the agency is present to keep Chuuya from socking him in the face, because he absolutely deserves it. Not for putting Chuuya in the book in the first place. That was work. Chuuya's a professional. Of course Rampo's challenge had been galling. An ability-less, famously childish, so-called master detective taking on Nakahara Chuuya in front of the Port Mafia headquarters and all of his assembled men? But the bastard had devised a solid plan. And really, Chuuya should have guessed that someone whose intellect had so clearly earned Dazai's respect would have a plan. No, it's not sealing them in the book that's earned Chuuya's anger. Instead, the brat's getting slugged for how he acted once they were both inside the book. For laughing at Chuuya and for leaving him behind to fight his way out. Chuuya glances around. He's on the southwest edge of Yokohama, near Kanai Park, and well off Mafia territory, out of sight or smell of the harbor. This might be close to one of the areas the remnants of the GSS is clinging to, or it might not be. The streets aren't clearly marked, and it's nearly dark. Twilight flattens the world around him, and Chuuya sighs. His phone broke while he was in the book, and he's pretty sure the battery would be dead by now anyway. It's been a long time for him, but hopefully not as long out here as it was in there. Chuuya considers borrowing a phone, calling a taxi, calling a subordinate, calling Koyo, calling Dazai. He considers hot-wiring a car or a motorbike. Then he squares his shoulders and starts walking, each step intentional, solid, uninflicted by tainted. He can feel Arahawaki roiling, pressing, muttering, making itself known again in the back of his mind, in the marrow of his bones, along the bends of his joints. He hadn't known how omnipresent the god was until it was gone for so long. Yeah, he says to himself, to the god, to corruption. Welcome back, I guess. By the time he reaches Mafia territory, Chuuya's step has lightened, gravity pressing down on him less than it did in the book. There are a few craters in the sidewalks and streets behind him, but that's nothing but a sign of temper, if anyone connects it to him. Only Mori and perhaps an Asan, and Dazai, always Dazai. And when did that start being a comforting thought? Will think to connect the ability nullifying time in the book to any potential loss of control. Chuuya shakes his head at the sunglasses and suit wearing subordinates who rush up to him the moment he crosses the invisible boundary line. He had been fairly sure his approach was being watched. This only confirms his suspicion. Just a phone, he says when the man hovers, looking uncertain. The woman hands one over without question, without a word, without so much as a stray facial expression. Her partner looks twitchy and is worse at hiding it. His machine gun is quivering, very faintly, in his white-knuckled hands. They've been worried then, Chuuya thinks. They still are. Maybe they're scared for him, maybe they're scared of him. It could be either. It could be both. He flicks the phone screen awake. When he sees the date, more than a month after the last date he remembers, only long years of practice keep his expression calm. It's been longer than he'd hoped, longer even than he'd expected. Chuuya enters a number he knows by heart and is only a little surprised when Mori picks up on the very first ring. He'd have programmed this number into his phone before giving it to anyone. He might be watching Chuuya right now, through local cameras. "Boss," Chuuya says. "I'm back. When do you want to debrief?" Mori calls him in immediately, has the suits who met him bundle him all into a car, to headquarters, up the elevator to Mori's enormous office. Chuuya walks in, footsteps soft on the carpeting, and sees Mori in his usual chair. Unusually, there's another chair set out, and a table, and a full meal laid out on it, more than a single serving, and all of it dishes Chuuya recognizes as Mori's preferred recovery foods. As if he thinks this might be parallel to recovering from corruption. Elise is nowhere to be seen, and Chuuya allows himself the faintest flicker of relief for her absence. "Boss," Chuuya says, announcing himself, waits for a nod, and sits down in the second chair. He recounts events from his viewpoint, hands clasped in his lap, and doesn't so much as look directly at the food until he's done. It was a brilliant tactical move, Chuuya admits. If Poe remains allied with the agency, even tenuously, we'll have to account for such tactics in the future. Mori nods. How much of a hand did Dazai have in the planning of it? Mori asks. He sounds flat and incurious, as if the answer doesn't matter much to him. Chuuya knows better. Mori is always visibly implacable except where Dazai is concerned. Others don't seem to see it, besides perhaps Ane-san, but Chuuya does. Something flickers beneath those deep waters when Dazai's name comes up, ripples the surface. So Chuuya gives Mori the truth, because Mori has his loyalty. Chuuya gives Mori the truth because Mori likely knows it already, and to do otherwise would be an unwise risk in such unfamiliar circumstances. And Chuuya gives Mori the truth because Dazai gave Edogawa Rampo the information he needed to trap Chuuya in that damn book. And it's been more than a month out here, and more than a year in there, and Chuuya is angry enough at the lanky shit not to try to cover for him. Rampo told me Dazai gave him advice. He says, it seems like that conversation on the steps of the Port Mafia building happened forever ago. Chuuya forces himself to add, because it's also the truth. He might have been lying, he might not. Mori nods. It's been a month, he says. Eat up and I'll fill you in on the essentials. You're not back on the roster for a week at least, while Arahabaki settles. Chuuya nods. Only years of hard-earned muscle memory keep him from tearing into the food like the half-starved kid he was before he joined the Mafia. Before Dazai, before Mori, before Ane-san taught him how to walk, how to talk, how to dress, how to eat, how to use his body as more than just a blunt weapon. Mori summarizes the situation, the conclusion of the fight between the agency and the Mafia, the resolution of the virus, of the golem, of Dostoevsky himself, the persistence of the now less tentative alliance with the agency. Chuuya listens and takes notes mentally of which events he'll get another point of view on, and who he'll check in with first. Even if he's off the roster, He'll check on his team, on Ane-san, on the various branches and subsections of the mafia that he's been keeping an eye on ever since he was made an executive. It occurs to him, hearing Mori half complain about the Jinko's bad influence, that Akutagawa might be a very suitable sparring partner in the next few weeks, if he's trying to learn better non-lethal control. Finally, the plates and bowls before him are empty. The teapots drained dry, and the water glasses decidedly less than half full. "Keep the phone," Mori tells him. "It has your contacts programmed in from the usual backups." Chuuya nods. The phone is bugged, of course, but he doesn't have the energy to care about that right now. He'll have to at least attempt to circumvent it later, or Mori will be suspicious. Dazai explained at once, seemingly entirely sincere in his labyrinthine description of the layers of deception and manipulation required to convince Mori something wasn't a threat. Chuuya had thought him mad, until Ane-san had agreed, had tried to explain the layers of mafia politics yet again. Chuuya knows he still doesn't fully understand the layers. He does his job. Isn't that enough? But that's a problem for tomorrow at the earliest. For now, Chuuya heads home. When he finally gets there, dragging himself out of the back of a chauffeured car and up the stairs, Chuuya finds that his apartment is dust-free, freshly aired out, and has clean sheets on the bed. He hangs up his hat and toes off his ruined shoes, which will probably have to go directly into the trash. Then he selects and uncorks a good but not exceptional bottle of wine to breathe. His clothes, when he examines them, are mostly unsalvageable, and so he drops them on the floor in a pile, strips, scrubs himself down vigorously, rinses off, and pads out into the kitchen to get himself a large glass of wine. That's a pity, Chuuya thinks. That had been a bespoke suit from a tailor in Paris, and replacing it would be annoying. He shrugs and returns to the bathroom as he settles in to savor the red wine while he soaks in achingly hot water. Head tipped back against the porcelain side of the tub while he feels his muscle begin, gradually, to unknot. He doesn't fall asleep in the bath, though it's a near thing. Only Dazai's voice in the back of his mind. "Oh, a drowning suicide, a classic for the chibi," forces him to drag himself up, empty wine glass in hand, re-cork the bottle, and crawl in bed without setting his alarm. Chuuya wakes at dawn, as always, stretches away the overnight aches and pains, and tosses together a quick breakfast. Whoever was sent to air out his apartment and refresh the linens also stocked his fridge fairly competently. He suspects he has an Ane-san to thank for that, though she wouldn't readily admit it. That done, he checks the time. It's still too early to bother anyone truly nocturnal, but it sounded like Akutagawa has been lazing with the agency more often than not, so he's likely to be awake. If not, Chuuya thinks, already dialing, that's just too bad. The kid was Dazai's trainee. He's definitely dealt with worse than Chuuya waking him up to spar. The phone rings 3 times before it's picked up.
"You didn't put it on silent?"
A voice hisses, sounding almost scandalized. It's got to be the Jinko, Nakajima Atsushi, Chuuya thinks. He should probably try to start using the kid's name. They're all of them more than just the measure of their abilities. Chuuya ought to know that better than most.
"Shut up,"
Akutagawa says, then, much more respectfully,
"Yes, Chuuya-san."
So, Chuuya thinks, Mori definitely cloned his old phone, made sure the number didn't change when he created this replacement. It means he can be sure anyone whose number is programmed in will pick up when Chuuya calls. It's the kind of detail Mori thinks of, the kind of attention that keeps him secure at the head of the port mafia. "Hey," Chuuya says. "I take it you're busy?"
No.
Akutagawa says, and there's a short set of noises that sound an awful lot like the kind of scuffle Chuuya and Dazai used to have when they were reckless teenagers. Chuuya cuts off that line of thought with the reflex of long-honed habits before nostalgia or anger can sink in.
Yes, he is,
says Nakajima, only slightly breathless, while Akutagawa makes a protesting noise in the background.
We're on a stakeout, Nakahara-san. He can't talk now. I'm sorry. You just had a whole conversation with Kunikida.
Akutagawa squawks, clearly grabbing the phone away from the other boy, and his voice is far too loud. If they're actually staking someone or something out, they'd better hope their target is incredibly incautious, deaf, or just plain stupid.
That's different,
Nakajima protests, loud enough that Chuuya can hear him clearly.
Yosano-sensei said I needed to talk to him. You know he's feeling worried because Dazai-san hasn't woken up yet. You're worried too.
Akutagawa huffs, but it's the sound he makes when someone's right and he doesn't want to admit it. It's also, Chuuya thinks, the sound he makes when he's pretending he doesn't have feelings anymore, pretending that Dazai finished beating them all out of him before he left, along with any other perceived weaknesses. Wait, Chuuya says, honing in on the important part of the statement. What about Dazai?
Oh shit,
Nakajima says, and he sounds genuinely appalled at himself. Someone needs to teach this kid how to lie, and fast, or he's never gonna make it in the real world. But that's definitely not Chuuya's problem.
Sorry, Nakahara-san, but that's kind of a secret. Dazai-san got himself and Kunikida hit by a van last night,
Akutagawa says.
The doctor swears he'll be fine, but she can't heal him because...
He makes an indistinct noise of frustration, all too clearly directed at no longer human.
He'd better be fine,
he says. He sounds worried beneath the bluster. Right, Chuuya says and hangs up without another word. Getting to the armed detective agency isn't a blur, and Chuuya doesn't go on autopilot or into a fugue state. He finishes dressing, moving carefully, puts on his second favorite pair of motorcycle boots, grabs his hat, and snags his keys on his way out the door. The motorbike is the fastest, reasonably discreet way to get to the agency. He can't show up in a mafia car, refuses to wait for transit, and as much as running, jumping, or flying there is tempting, it's full daylight. The ride is much shorter than it would be if Chuuya had obeyed pretty much any traffic laws, but long enough that he's had time to concoct a million scenarios out of escalating anxiety before he's arrived. Chuuya parks the motorcycle, locks it, and takes the stairs 2 at a time. It's tempting to just drive the motorcycle up the side of the building, to walk up it himself, to arrive hovering at their window in a red blaze, but that would draw even more attention. And if Dazai is out of commission, Chuuya's not putting any more of a target on his head than he has to. Besides, he hasn't tested Tainted since getting out of the book, and he's not willing to push it if he doesn't have to. That was what training with Akutagawa was supposed to accomplish. Of course, Chuuya thinks, steeling himself as he pushes open the door to the dinky office full of people that Dazai chose over him. Maybe he'll get lucky. Maybe he'll get a fight out of this after all. The room is half empty. The blonde boy from the tunnel grins at him, popping to his feet with a seemingly friendly wave. As far as Chuuya can tell, this kid always looks friendly, even when he's being peppered by a half-dozen machine guns, so that means absolutely nothing. Seated at the office's central desk, Edogawa Rampo peers over a magazine, then smiles, slow and almost feral with amusement and satisfaction. Chuuya considers pushing him out the window, and dismisses it as a distraction likely to engender too much ill will. Everyone at the agency is almost absurdly protective of Rampo, like he's some kind of mascot. It's almost like they think his persistent helplessness is something they can afford to find endearing, rather than a target on all their backs. "Took you long enough," Rampo says, and goes back to his magazine, as if that's it, as if that's even a remotely normal thing to say to another human being who has lost almost a month, a year, of his life because of you. At the desk beside Rampo's, the redhead with the illusion ability, Tanizaki, grimaces. "Sorry, Nakahara-san." He apologizes, as if he has anything to apologize for, as if he's accustomed to running damage control for his asshole genius co-worker. On another day, Chuuya might feel sympathy for the kid, might have a sense of fellow feeling. Right now, he's too focused on his reason for being at the agency at all. "Where is he?" Chuuya hears himself demand. His voice is harsh and his accent slipped. An A-san would be disappointed at the lack of vocal control. The blonde boy walks towards him, hands out, clearly trying to look unthreatening, just as clearly trying to make himself the primary target of Chuuya's anger. "Where's who?" the boy asks, but he's as bad a liar as Nakajima. He glances towards a closed door to his left. Ah, Chuuya thinks. Back there. So he just has to get through that door with minimum of property damage and 0 fatalities. Casualties might be tolerable given the doctor's ability. He probably shouldn't bring down the roof though. Structural damage might endanger Dazai. "Nakahara-san, a word," says a calm, low voice. The certainty of its tone cuts through Chuuya's focus and demands his attention, inescapable as a black hole. Fukuzawa Yukichi stands before another closed door. Behind him, a black-haired girl in a school uniform scuttles to the redhead's desk. "Naomi!" The illusion user protests. She hisses something else back at him, but Chuuya ignores their bickering to focus on the head of the armed detective agency. "Sir," he says, and nods just enough to be proper, not enough to be offensive to either Mori's authority or his own. "Atsushi told us you might be coming," Fukuzawa says. Rampo snorts, but says nothing else. Chuuya ignores him, focusing on the head of the agency, who is the most urgent threat in the room, both for his swordsmanship and for his authority over everyone else present. Fukuzawa's face is nearly as expressionless as Mori's. Somehow, instead of seeming flensed of unwelcome humanity, of weakness like emotion, he seems calm, nearly placid, as if he's been distilled enough to the core of himself. Chuuya blinks. "Did he?" he says after a moment, because Fukuzawa seems to expect some kind of reply. Indeed, the agency head replies. "If you'll follow me, Dazai-kun is still unconscious, but Yosano assures me he will make a full recovery, given appropriate care and a suitably calm environment." There is no malice in his words, none of the casual tingling danger that's so common in the port mafia. At the same time, Chuuya knows down to his bones that that statement was not a threat, but a promise, and that if Chuuya so much as threatens to disturb Dazai's recovery, there will be consequences. The first thing Chuuya thinks upon stepping into the room is this: Dazai looks terrible. Worse than that, Dazai looks small. The hospital bed they've put him in isn't any larger than any other one Chuuya has seen. Logically, it shouldn't be any different than any other time he's seen Dazai unconscious. Dazai is in a hospital gown, his arms laid over the sheets at his sides for ease of IV access. Chuuya's brain starts whirring. Why does he need an IV? Why does he need two? But first, he can see that Dazai's forearms and neck are bare of bandages. What the fuck? Chuuya says. He glares at Fukuzawa, at Yosano, at Kunikida, who sat up straight from Dazai's bedside when they walked into the room, notebook at hand. He, at least, looks prepared to treat Chuuya as a threat. It's hilarious he thinks he'd have a chance in a fair fight, or even an unfair one, but Chuuya can appreciate the intention to protect an injured partner at least. Chuuya doesn't wait for an answer, just strides over to Yosano, who is sitting at her desk, and holds out a hand. Bandages, he demands. You've got to have backups on hand. He won't thank you if he wakes up like this. Yosano blinks at him. Ah, she says, and spins in her chair to rummage in a cabinet to her right. You know how... Yes, Chuuya snaps. Behind him, he hears whispers, then the door clicking. The decreased background noise of a human breath, the decreased sense of presence, tells him before he turns around that Fukuzawa has left an executive of the Port Mafia alone with 3 of his agents, the most effective of whom is out cold. It might be an act of trust, it might be a test, it might be faith in his operatives. Dazai would be running the numbers right now, would have ranked probabilities for each potential likelihood, weighted by past behavior, current events, the weather, things Chuuya would never consider related. Right now, Chuuya doesn't care which it is. He grabs the roll of bandages Yosano holds out, gestures for another one, and heads over to the bed. They're normal length IV needles? He asks Yosano, because that will affect how he moves Dazai's arms. Mori sometimes used longer ones. Chuuya learned the hard way to ask first. Yes, she says. She's sitting still now, hands clasped on her crossed legs, the perfect picture of poise. She might be smiling slightly. She looks a little bit like an Asan in that posture. Kunikida, on the other side of the bed, just looks baffled. Chuuya glares at him, goodwill evaporating. What kind of partner is he to let Dazai stay uncovered like this, naked to the prying eyes of anyone who might come in? Good, Chuuya says, and lifts Dazai's left wrist, holding the end of the bandage in place with his thumb. He falls into the near trance of wrapping Dazai's arm, moving it gently, holding the bandage in place with the ease of long practice. With another person, he'd be able to lift and hold the arm in place with tainted, and use both hands to wrap. But that's never been an option with Dazai, even when he's out cold, even when he's drugged to the gills, even when he's in a near coma, even when he's awake and trying to suppress no longer human. Left arm, done. Chuuya gestures at Kunikida to get out of the way, and is only mildly surprised when he does so without a word. Right arm, done. The neck will be more challenging. Chuuya makes a decision. Help me sit him up, he says to Kunikida, who has been hovering, less distracting than Chuuya had expected. One arm behind his shoulders, the other bracing his head. I'll manage his hair. Is this really necessary? Kunikida starts, and Chuuya glares. The man swallows and nods. All right. He agrees, and he must be stronger than he looks, because he holds Dazai's limp torso in place without any visible sign of strain. Put him down, Chuuya says, and tucks the last edge of the bandage under itself. The wraps aren't as neat as when Dazai does them, but Chuuya hasn't done this in more than 4 years. In more than 5 years, maybe, if the book counts. He's still not sure if the time in the book counts. He's not sure if he wants the time in the book to count. You're good at that, Yosano observes. Her tone is calm, impartial, an observation, not a criticism, Just a comment. Yeah, Chuuya says, tossing the remains of the second, half-used roll back at her. Well, he feels tired all of a sudden, weary and drained in a way that he associates with overuse and corruption, except that his nerves aren't singing, and he's not about to pass out from the pain. He doesn't want to explain himself, to open up the years of partnership with Dazai, the ways they'd moved into and out of each other's lives seamlessly, without any conscious thought on Chuuya's part, orbiting each other without effort. He doesn't want to think about it at all most days, lest he make himself aware of the loss. It's even worse now, here in the Armed Detective Agency's medical bay, surrounded by Dazai's new co-workers, being stared at by the man Dazai now calls his partner, a man who didn't even know how to wrap Dazai's bandages. Would it be overstepping if I asked why you feel so strongly about this? Kunikida ventures. Chuuya lowers himself into the chair by Dazai's bedside, the one Kunikida was sitting in when he entered the room. He can feel the old, familiar ache of Arahabaki settling into his joints again, stiffening up his muscles. It seems like he didn't stretch well enough this morning. He cares about it. Chuuya says he's too tired to lie, to verbally sidestep, to play the information politics game with any kind of skill. Isn't that enough reason? As a teenager, Chuuya had been certain there was some dire secret hidden under Dazai's bandages. Horrible scars, evidence of suicide attempts. The bandages must conceal something shameful, something that had to be hidden. He was determined to discover it, to find a weak spot in someone he considered an adversary. Then, gradually, he became Dazai's partner in truth, and after the Dragon's Head incident, earned some measure of his trust. And Chuuya learned that yes, there are hidden scars, but everyone in the Port Mafia acquires scars. Perhaps some of the silvery lines on Dazai's wrists might have been self-inflicted, but they might equally have been from torture or injury. The majority of Dazai's skin is unmarked, unmarred, showing nothing to spark shame or dread, nothing that needs to be hidden. Ah, Kunikida says, and it sounds like he almost understands. He shuffles his feet, tucks the sheet in around Dazai's chest. He looks unmoored, like he might float away, like only willpower is stopping him from fidgeting. Stop blooming and sit down already, Chuuya snaps. You're even taller than this asshole, and I refuse to get a crick in my neck looking up at you while he sleeps. Yosano makes a sound that might be a laugh, picks up the phone, and a moment later the schoolgirl comes in with a second chair. Her eyes are sharp, but she doesn't say a word before she leaves. She'll report back to the others, Chuuya is sure. He doesn't know a lot about her, but he's willing to bet she's smarter than she pretends, since she works at the agency. Dazai may think he's stupid, but Chuuya didn't get where he is by trusting just anyone. When Kunikida sits down, Chuuya nods. What happened? Chuuya says. It's not, his tone implies, a question. It's a demand. To his surprise, Kunikida explains. Chuuya takes the opportunity to look him over as he speaks. For someone who usually pays nearly as much attention to his appearance as Chuuya does, the detective looks bad. His hair is limp, and though his gaze is sharp and his suit cleanly pressed, he holds himself like someone who hasn't slept, and worse, like someone who isn't accustomed to missing sleep. Kunikida pauses, and Chuuya meets his eyes. The van? Chuuya prompts. It was too fast, Kunikida says. He looks down, breaking Chuuya's gaze, not looking at Dazai. I wasn't quick enough. You seem to have gotten out of the way just fine. Chuuya snaps, because while Dazai has gauze taped to one side of his face, clear signs of road rash, and a lump under the covers that may as well be a cast on one leg, bandages around his ribs that suggest bruising, if not outright breaks, Kunikida looks unhurt. Chuuya can feel his ability rising alongside his anger, can feel the faint tint to the air that means he's limened in red light. He almost embraces it, almost throws Kunikida across the room to vent his frustration, but he can feel Arahabaki stretching its spidery limbs and he can't allow that. Not now. He grabs for the back of Dazai's hand, careful of the splinted fingers, and holds on, allowing the blue haze of no longer human to rinse his anger away, to help him bottle the god back up in its cage. There is a moment of silence. Yosano cuts in before Kunikida can reply, before Chuuya can say anything else.
Gotten out of the way? She demands. Kunikida took most of the damage. I almost didn't get there in time, and I wouldn't have if he hadn't had the sense to use his ability to create and deploy an emergency beacon while rolling Dazai under himself to protect him.
Kunikida still didn't look up. I wasn't quick enough, he repeats. Dazai still hasn't woken up.
And you nearly didn't wake up at all, Yosano snaps. I had to use my ability on you twice, and you're still not completely healed, so stop with that martyr bullshit.
Chuuya blinks and lets the facts rearrange themselves in his mind as he cautiously lets go of Dazai's hand. You took the hit for Dazai, he says. It's almost, but not quite, a question. Kunikida shrugs. You took the hit from a speeding van for Dazai? This time it isn't a question.
Are you fucking suicidal too?
Chuuya demands. He's seen what impact with that size of a van can do. If it was going fast enough that someone as skilled as Kunikida couldn't dodge, it was definitely going fast enough to do more damage than Chuuya wants to consider. Yosano-sensei can't heal Dazai, Kunikida says. He was the primary target. It was my job. Chuuya pauses, because he said similar things often enough to Mori, to Anei-san, even to Dazai, once or twice. I'm just doing my job, he's told them. It seems sensible when he says it. It seems a little different, more reckless, less reasonable when he hears Kunikida say it. You're an idiot, Yosano replies. She sounds tired now, not angry. This is that subway bomber all over again. You can't keep doing this, Kunikida. Someday I'm not gonna be fast enough. Kunikida just shrugs. It won't matter to me if you're not, he says. I couldn't live with myself, knowing I let someone else die in front of me. That, Chuuya thinks, is naivete of the highest order. People die and people leave. You keep going. You keep going, he thinks, and glances at Dazai, who left, who also kept going, whom Chuuya hasn't seen this badly injured since they were kids, if ever. Chuuya has half a mind to walk out, to leave them behind the way Dazai left him behind 4 years ago. Still, this idealistic idiot did just save Dazai's life, and very nearly at the cost of his own if Yosano is to be believed. That's not nothing, and Chuuya pays his debts. He used to pay Dazai's too, and it looks like that's another habit he hasn't managed to break. How bad was it? Chuuya asks Yosano, tipping his head at Kunikida, who sputters something about doctor-patient confidentiality. Bad enough, she says. You know what my ability can do? That damn lemon bomber told you about me healing myself on the train? Chuuya nods. Yosano had been at ground zero of an explosion, after being half dead already, and had stood up,
visibly hale and hearty. It had terrified Kaiju more than he'd wanted to admit in words. Chuuya had been able to see the disquiet on his face as Kaiju reported in afterwards. "Well," Yosano says, shrugging, "he's still injured after 2 passes, even if he won't admit it." She adds, the glare she aims at Kunikida contains enough malice that Chuuya moves her up his agency threat list and makes a note not to get on her bad side. "Got it," Chuuya says. "And he hasn't slept?" He directs the question at Yosano, which makes Kunikida sputter again. "I went back to the dorms," he protests. "He hasn't slept," Yosano confirms, and turns her scowl on Kunikida. "You were gone exactly as long as it would take you to arrive there, shower, change, and return. You're not the only one who can read an agenda or set a timer." Kunikida clearly took care of his appearance. He's just as clearly exhausted. His fresh clothing seems to be serving as a kind of armor for him, and Chuuya can appreciate a man who understands tailoring, even if it's clear from Kunikida's suit's fabric and cut that the ADA pays far worse than the Mafia. Still, he's not going to be an effective bodyguard if he's dead on his feet. Chuuya sighs. "Go sleep," he says, and nods at Dazai's unconscious body. "I'll babysit this asshole for a while." Kunikida blinks at him. "What?" he asks, clearly baffled. Yosano turns back to her desk, clearly dismissing them. Chuuya is willing to bet she's even more exhausted than Kunikida, but she carries it better. From what he knows of her history, from Mafia rumors and the files he's been allowed to pilfer, Chuuya suspects she has much more practice running on fumes than anyone else in the agency, besides Dazai. Anei-san wouldn't have let Kyoka start that branch of training yet, young as she still was. "You're standing guard," Chuuya says, which is smart. Even if the people you're worried about would be staggeringly stupid to attack the agency, there are plenty of other people who might come after Dazai if word gets out that he's injured. But you're no good until you've slept. Nakajima and Akutagawa will argue and fight if you let them in, which is why you have them on a fake stakeout, right? And everyone else is in the front line of defense in the main office. So go get some fucking sleep. I'll stay. Kunikida looks honestly baffled by this elementary analysis of the situation. Chuuya takes a deep breath, remembers Fukuzawa's emphasis on Dazai's need for a calm environment, and lets it back without yelling. "He's right," Yosano says, an unexpected ally. "I have a spare futon in the storeroom. It's not comfortable, but it's good enough. Go rest, Kunikida. The sooner you sleep, the sooner you're back. We've got this." Kunikida looks at Chuuya again, seated at Dazai's bedside, and back at Yosano, who gives him a nod. 4 hours. Kunikida allows, heaving himself to his feet. 12. Yosano retorts immediately. 8. Chuuya says, all too accustomed to haggling over rest. "And we'll get you if he wakes up." Kunikida brightens at that, and Yosano scowls, but lets him go. "You're not planning to wake him up, are you?" she says after the door has closed. "You just lied to him." She doesn't say. He can't tell if she approves or not. "I won't need to," Chuuya says. "You've got Dazai drugged to the gills, and he's out cold. Even if you took him off the sedatives right now, he'd be out for more than 8 hours. Yosano turns in her chair to stare at him. "The IV bags are unlabeled," she says. "It's a question. It's almost a demand." "And he didn't so much as stir when I wrapped his wrists, despite splinted fingers, or when Kunikida sat him up, despite cracked ribs. How badly is his leg broken?" She gives him a long, measuring look. "You're taking this almost alarmingly calmly," she says. "Why are you taking this so well, Nakahara-san?" Chuuya shrugs, He's not dead, he says, and you're clearly doing your best to make sure he stays that way. Did you expect me to bring the roof down or kidnap him? Yosano's wince tells him that yes, she had expected that, or something very like it. He wouldn't thank me for bringing him to a hospital, and he'd never forgive me for putting him in Mori's debt. You may have a flashy ability, but you're clearly also a competent doctor. He leans back, stretches slightly to loosen up his shoulders, kicks his feet out under the hospital bed to stretch his legs a bit. He definitely didn't stretch enough this morning. He got so used to not having to do more than the bare minimum in the book. He's not going anywhere near Mori, Yosano says. Her voice is sharp, almost brittle in its ferocity. I know a discreet hospital if it comes to that. Okay, Chuuya says, keeping his tone carefully easy, his posture languid and relaxed. He's never been particularly impressed with Mori's bedside manner, but no one in the Port Mafia expects a gentle touch from their boss if they're unlucky enough to be injured when he's in a medicing mood. Yosano's refusal is more than that, he's sure, but unlike some people, Chuuya knows when to stop digging, when to leave well enough alone. There are secrets you can't unlearn, and Chuuya has a job to do. Yosano relaxes fractionally. They lapse into silence. When it becomes clear she's not going to say anything more, Chuuya pulls out his phone and texts his team and Asan, the black lizard. He tells them he's back, he's fine, he's off the roster for a week on the boss's orders. He tells Asan he'll visit when he can, but not expect him immediately. Then he texts Akutagawa. I'm back, he texts, even though they spoke earlier. Leaving Akutagawa off his list of people to contact would look wrong, and he doesn't want to have anyone to have reason to go digging for details about their call. He guesses his new phone is bugged, but doesn't know how much Akutagawa's is. He doesn't say more. Dazai won't want anyone to have written proof that he's injured. I'm off the roster for a week. No injuries worth worrying about. Swing by later. I want to spar. Then he pulls up a novel on the phone. It really is a full clone of his old one, which should probably worry him more than it does. Leans back in the surprisingly comfortable chair and settles in to read. Protective Chuuya, protective Chuuya. Dazai getting so distracted over Chuuya coming out of the book to the point of a van hitting him, Kunikida basically sacrificing himself, all of them showing genuine and unfiltered care for Dazai, all of my favorite tropes in one fic, and it's still a long way from being done. Thank you so much, tucuxi, for giving me permission to podfic your lovely work. Part 2 should be released soon. And thank you, dear listeners, for watching. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, YouTube community tabs are now open for you to post, aside from Tumblr. And if you'd like to show more support or check out the monthly schedule, click the link through Ko-fi. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.